This week on BuzzFeed Unsolved, we investigate the gruesome murder of Regan, daughter of King Lear, in one of the most gruesome tragedies in all of English history.
That's very interesting. Zoe, do you know anything about this?
I know enough. Battles for love and power were really common among royal families back then, and Lear's family was a crazy mess and honestly a bit of a tragedy. Regan was the first of Lear's daughters to die, and her murder is still being investigated to this day.
The murder took place sometime during the 8th century BC, with various conflicts on either side of her, her father and youngest sister sentenced to death on one side, and her husband having been stabbed to death on the other. She was found too sick to move by her older sister Goneril, only to die moments later. There are several suspects, of whom all have had valid reasons to kill Regan. Who was the true murderer? Let's get into it.
The story begins in 8th century England, with her father just about to retire off the throne as king. The king, King Lear, asked Regan and her sisters Goneril and Cordelia to confess their love for him. While Goneril and Regan were able to do so eloquently, Cordelia failed to please her father and was banished from the kingdom, only to be married off to the King of France.
King Lear then sought care from his daughters, Goneril and Regan. The daughters, instead of treating the king as he requested, refused to accept his knights and his company. Consequently, Lear ran off into the storm.
People said he lost his mind as they saw him yell at the storm and murmur quietly. No one can be sure whom he was speaking to. Some witnesses even said Lear was possessed.
Why would Goneril and Regan do such a thing to their father? Letting him run alone into the storm? That's so disrespectful. A daughter shouldn't do that.
Well, that's what they did.
I guess the storm kind of represented King Lear's mental state, his emotions. He must have felt a lot of anger and disappointment and betrayal.
Yeah, that sounds like it could be the thing. It could also represent the fact that this newly powerless king is kind of coming to a sense of realizing his own mortality and frailty, right?
Yeah.
Like, this king is now scared and confused, and that really humbles someone.
Yikes.
Slowly embodying an all-encompassing madness, Lear endured the many uncomfortable nights, reveling over the betrayal he had faced as his own two daughters took control of his kingdom and took no care of him. In the end, it was Cordelia, Lear's youngest and most virtuous daughter, who led her men from France to save her father and his kingdom. Though they fought bravely, they lost their battle against Goneril, Regan, Lear's two oldest daughters, and Edmund, the bastard son of the Duke of Gloucester. Resultantly, both King Lear and Cordelia were captured.
Ultimately, there are many suspects for Regan's murder. The first suspect for this case is Regan's sister Goneril. Goneril and Regan were both deeply in love with Edmund. As a result of this infatuation, it was believed that Goneril added poison in the wine Regan drank. Without much flair, Regan died. Well, that is just one version of Regan's mysterious death.
I mean, that's the end of the story, right? Goneril is the murderer. She is known to be hot-headed, and she carried out whatever she wanted to do without second thought or hesitation.
I mean, there are other suspects. Just wait.
Another suspect in Regan's murder case is Edmund. Edmund, the bastard son of the Duke of Gloucester, was said to have driven away the Duke's legitimate son Edgar, and even took his father's title. As he became the new Earl of Gloucester, Edmund gained the interest of the old king's daughters, Goneril and Regan.
Oh, I get it now. Edmund must have wanted to be with Goneril and not Regan. That's probably why he murdered Regan, so she wouldn't come in their way in the future.
I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah.
Both Goneril and Regan took interest in Edmund, but with Regan's husband, the Duke of Cornwall, having been stabbed by one of his servants, it seemed more plausible for Regan to be with Edmund. Edmund, however, with little care for either of the two sisters, could have, very likely, gotten rid of Regan to take control of the land she now owned entirely.
Ha, Zoe, I was right.
I mean, Edmund was overall a pretty bad guy. He lied a lot to his father, he framed his brother for crimes he didn't commit, and overall he played a pretty big part in his father's punishment. The gods are speaking.
Punishment? What?
Yes, the Duke of Cornwall, Regan's husband, right? That one. He plucked out his eyes for assisting Lear. Real nasty guy, that one.
Yeah, I agree, but even though that was a little bit too harsh, not a little bit, very harsh, Gloucester, the blindness of Gloucester is very symbolic. And if you think about it, Lear kind of experienced the same thing. Both Lear and Gloucester experienced betrayal by their children. And they were blind towards it until the very end.
Right, yeah, I guess you're right. I mean, the parallels between the two characters are insane. They both had both loyal and disloyal children, and they both managed to keep the disloyal ones as their heirs and banish the loyal ones despite the clarity of the situation. Nasty guy.
The Duke of Albany is another primary suspect in Regan's case. He was a passive figure throughout his marriage to Goneril, rarely standing out against or aiding his wife. Albany was constantly a witness to the wrongdoings of his wife and her sister. It is indeed possible that, eventually, he may have come to realize the extent of their terrible intentions and decide to take action by killing Regan, the more passive yet evil of the two. In comparison to Goneril and Regan, he was far more Lear's ally, eventually choosing his side to oppose the wrongdoings of both Regan and Goneril. It is also believed that Albany became the ruler of England after King Lear's tragic death. Murdering Regan would have definitively enforced his position as an ally of the king and thus a rightful and just ruler.
I don't think I believe that one as much because Albany, he doesn't really have that much of a motive to kill Regan, right?
You don't think? I mean, I think after sitting idly by and watching his sisters abuse everyone around him, I think he'd snap.
Well, I don't think he would take such a drastic measure because Albany doesn't really have that much power, right? And sometimes you would forget his presence and forget that he even exists.
That's so mean. I mean, I guess I see where you're coming from. Considering he overtook the kingdom, he didn't really have much of a part in the events leading up to it.
The final suspect in Regan's case is Edgar, Edmund's half-brother and the eldest legitimate son of the Earl of Gloucester. Prior to Regan's murder, Edgar had suffered a lot of hardships at the hand of his brother, who framed him for conspiring against their father and had banished him from the kingdom under the threat of execution. In turn, he was forced to disguise himself as poor Tom, a mad and powerless man, in order to save his own life.
These are getting more and more out of the blue. I think Edgar probably has more problems with Edmund than with the sisters, Goneril and Regan. What do you think?
I mean, we already heard that the sisters in Cornwall were responsible for Gloucester's torture. Maybe it was a revenge thing.
A revenge thing? I think revenge is not much of a motivator for these people. It's probably more about order and how things are supposed to be. If Edgar killed Regan, it was probably because she was causing too much chaos in the kingdom.
Look at you little expert. Yeah, I think I agree. It doesn't seem reasonable for Edgar to have killed Regan. Besides, he had other things on his mind at the time.
To date, only circumstantial evidence has led many to believe Goneril to be the murderer. If you'll recall, however, with Regan's pride and lack of morality, many had the incentive to be the cause of her murder, whether it be a love story gone wrong or a sisterly feud gone too far. In the end, there aren't many leads on the notorious murderer. Was this the work of blind rage or a calculated betrayal? For now, the truth of Regan's death remains unsolved.